This poor girl finds a blind millionaire with a suitcase full of cash open in the middle of the street. But little did she know, this day would change her life. Comment what you think will happen and subscribe to my channel to support my work. The sky dawned a dreary grey that July morning, with heavy clouds threatening to unleash their rain upon the city at any moment. The biting wind whipped through the deserted downtown streets, carrying dry leaves and scraps of paper. Amidst the desolate scene, a small figure moved slowly, pushing a rusty shopping cart that squeaked with every movement. Mia was only 5 years old, but her brown eyes carried a weight that didn't belong to childhood. Her bare feet, covered in sores and calluses, left small streaks of blood on the asphalt as she walked. The dress, which might once have been pink, was now an indefinable color, stained by the dirt of the streets where she slept. Her small hands, rough and scraped, gripped tightly onto the sides of the cart as she rummaged through the dumpsters along Main Street. With each lid she lifted, her heart beat a little faster, hoping to find something to quell the hunger that had been gnawing at her stomach for days. The previous night had been particularly harsh. Alone under the awning of an abandoned storefront, Mia cried until her eyes were swollen and stinging. The cold seeped into her bones, and the noises of the night frightened her. She hugged herself, trying to protect herself from a world that seemed too big, too cruel for such a small child. That morning, as she pushed her cart along the cracked sidewalk, something caught her attention. A man was kneeling on the pavement, his hands trembling as he felt around on the ground. Beside him, an open briefcase revealed something Mia had never seen in such quantity: money neatly stacked in perfect bundles. The man wore a dark suit that, even rumpled, betrayed his affluent background. His dark glasses couldn't completely hide the deep circles under his pale face. A white cane lay fallen beside him, and his hands continued to grope desperately at the ground. Mia stopped her cart and watched the scene with curiosity. Her first instinct was to run over there and grab as much money as she could carry. It could mean food for weeks, maybe even a warm place to sleep. But something stopped her. Something in the man's desperation touched a part of her that hadn't yet been hardened by life on the streets. With hesitant steps, she approached. The sound of her bare feet on the concrete made the man turn his head in her direction, even though his eyes couldn't see her. "Who's there?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. Mia didn't answer immediately. She moved a little closer, watching the man's face carefully. There was something about him that made her think of sadness, a sadness as deep as the one she carried herself. Do you have a teardrop-shaped scar on your arm?" he asked suddenly, his voice filled with hope. Mia looked at her own arms, covered in scratches and recent bruises. "No, just scabs," she replied in her childish voice. The man lowered his head, a heavy sigh escaping his lips. "I thought you might be my daughter. Sorry." The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sound of traffic that was beginning to build. Mia remained standing, watching the man who seemed more and more lost. His briefcase remained open, the money exposed for anyone who passed by. But she couldn't take her eyes off his face. It was then that she noticed the tears that were streaming from under his dark glasses. The man was crying silently, his shoulders trembling slightly. Without thinking twice, Mia took another step forward and touched his hand with her dirty little fingers. The man startled at the touch but didn't pull away. His hands were warm, unlike hers, which were cold from the cold morning. For a moment, they remained like that, connected by that simple touch that seemed to say more than words. "What's your name?" Mia asked, her small voice breaking the silence. "Theodore," he replied, a slight tremor still present in his voice. "And you, little one?" "Mia," she replied, squeezing his hand a little tighter. "Mia," Theodore repeated, as if testing the name on his tongue. Can you help me find my hotel? I'm lost." The girl looked around, recognizing the streets she had turned into her forced home. She knew every alley, every corner, every building. It was her lonely playground, her territory of survival. "I know all the places," she said with a simplicity that only children possess. "I can take you." Theodore closed his briefcase carefully, stood up with difficulty, and picked up his cane. Mia held his free hand firmly, feeling a strange sense of purpose. For the first time in a long time, someone needed her for something. Besides, Mia guided Theodore through the downtown streets with a surprising confidence for someone so small. Her bare feet instinctively found the safest paths, avoiding holes and uneven surfaces that could make the man stumble. The sound of the cane tapping rhythmically against the ground echoed off the walls of the buildings. As they walked, Theodore felt the weight of the briefcase in his hand. All that money, which had once meant so much, now seemed meaningless. His mind wandered back 3 months, when his life still made sense. He owned a construction company, had a family, a beautiful house in the best neighborhood in town, until a household accident changed everything. It was on a Sunday afternoon. He was doing some minor repairs around the house, something he used to distract himself from the stress of work. Some cleaning fluid splashed into his eyes. At first, he thought it wasn't anything serious, but the hours turned into days in the hospital, and the days into weeks of darkness. The diagnosis was devastating: irreversible vision loss. The adjustment was impossible. He couldn't accept his new condition. The doctors talked about rehabilitation, about learning a new way of living, but all he could feel was anger. Anger at fate, anger at himself, anger at the world that was now plunged into eternal darkness. His wife tried to help, but he pushed her away with harsh words and even harsher silences. His daughter, Laura, who was 6 years old, cried every time he yelled, frightened by that unrecognizable version of her father. The last straw was when, in a fit of rage, he knocked all the picture frames off the shelf, shattering the memories of happier times. "Is that the big hotel?" Mia's voice brought him back to the present. She was pointing at an imposing building that rose up in front of them. "I can't tell you," he replied bitterly. "I can't see." Mia squeezed his hand tighter. "Sorry," she murmured. "I forgot." The doorman at the hotel, a middle-aged man in an impeccable uniform, widened his eyes as he saw the unusual duo approaching. A street child, dirty and barefoot, leading a well-dressed man carrying an expensive briefcase. His first impulse was to prevent the girl from entering, but something in the way she held the man's hand made him hesitate. "Mr. Theodore!" exclaimed the doorman, recognizing the guest. "We were worried. You left hours ago without saying anything." Theodore just nodded, his face a mask of indifference. Mia let go of his hand, feeling that her mission was accomplished. She was about to turn around and return to her world of survival when she felt something being placed in her hands. It was one of the bundles of money from the briefcase. Theodore had opened the clasp with difficulty and removed a considerable amount. "Take it," he said, his voice choked. "You've helped me more than you know." Mia looked at the money in her small, dirty hands, her eyes wide with amazement. She had never held so much money in her life. It was more than she could collect gathering cans for months. Her fingers trembled as she touched the clean, organized bills. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice almost disappearing. Theodore tried to smile, but the gesture came out as a grimace of pain. "No, thank you." The doorman watched the scene with a mixture of discomfort and fascination. He saw when the girl, after a moment of hesitation, turned and ran down the sidewalk, her bare feet pattering against the concrete at an accelerated pace. The sound faded until it disappeared completely. Theodore entered the hotel in silence, refusing the help offered by the doorman. He went up to his room on the 12th floor, guided only by his cane and the memory of the last few days. Upon closing the door, he collapsed onto the king-size bed, still fully dressed. The hotel room was luxurious, with a panoramic view of the city. Not that it made any difference to him now. He had fled there a week ago, after withdrawing all the money he could from his personal accounts. He didn't tell anyone, didn't leave any notes. He simply disappeared. His family must be desperate, looking for him. His wife, Marina, has probably already reported his disappearance to the police. Laura must cry every night, asking for the 1,000th time when her father will come home. But he couldn't go back. Not like that. Not being just a shadow of the man he used to be. The hours dragged on that afternoon. Theodore remained lying down, lost in dark thoughts. The bundle of money he had given to the girl wasn't even missed. He still had much more in the briefcase, more than he would need for what he was planning to do. His fingers found the dark glasses and removed them slowly. Underneath them, his permanently open eyes stared into nothingness. The irises, once a vibrant brown, now had a whitish color, the result of the accident. He ran his fingers over his face, feeling his unshaven beard, the furrows that bitterness had carved into his skin. The sound of the city came in through the window, horns, distant voices, the constant noise of life that went on its course, indifferent to his pain. Somewhere down there, a small, dirty girl was walking with a bundle of money, not knowing exactly what to do with it. Theodore got up with difficulty and walked to the window. His fingers touched the cold glass, and he imagined the view that he might once have admired. From there, the city stretching to the horizon, the lights beginning to turn on in the twilight, the people looking tiny down there. It was then that he made a decision. Tomorrow would be his last day. He had already planned everything. There was an abandoned construction site a few blocks away, with a deep crater open in the ground. No one would find him there. It would be an appropriate end for someone who was already living in the shadows. But first, he needed to return to that intersection one more time. He needed to feel again that small, gentle touch on his hand, hear that childish voice that for a brief moment had illuminated his darkness. It was a last wish, a last attempt to find something that made sense before the end. What Theodore didn't know was that fate had other plans, that casual encounter with a street child was just the beginning of a story that would change not only his life, but also the life of that small lost soul who had guided him through the city. Mia ran until she couldn't run anymore, the bundle of money clutched against her chest as if it were a precious treasure. Her sore feet left small streaks of blood along the way, but she felt no pain. Her mind was focused on finding a safe place, away from the covetous eyes of the streets. She ended up reaching her usual hiding place, a small gap between two old buildings, protected by a rusty sheet of zinc that she had found months ago. There, she kept her few belongings, an armless doll that she had found in the trash, a thin and torn blanket, and a small can where she kept the coins she occasionally earned from passers-by. She sat down on the dirty floor and finally looked at the money in her hands. It was more bills than she had ever seen in her life. She began to count them awkwardly, her dirty fingers staining the edges of the clean banknotes. She didn't know the numbers very well, but she recognized some larger bills. It would be enough to buy food for many days, maybe even new clothes. But something prevented her from rejoicing in that sudden wealth. The image of the blind man, his deep sadness, the way he was looking for his daughter, all that weighed on her small heart. She knew that kind of pain well. It was the same she felt every night when she huddled alone in her corner, wishing she had a family to call her own. Her thoughts flew to the past, to the hazy memories she tried to forget. She vaguely remembered a dark-haired woman, her mother lying on a hospital bed, the smell of medicines, the white walls, the whispered voices of adults. Then a series of different faces, people who promised to take care of her but never stayed for long. The last, family. She had abandoned her at a gas station almost a year ago. They said they were going to fill up the car and never came back. She waited for hours, sitting on the curb, until she understood that she was alone again. Since then, the streets had become her home and survival her only concern. The sound of footsteps nearby made her quickly hide the money under the torn blanket. It was John, an older street kid who sometimes protected her from the dangers of the night. He appeared at the entrance to the alley, his thin face marked by old scars. "Hey, Squirt, get anything today?" he asked, sitting down next to her. Mia shook her head negatively, feeling her heart race. She couldn't tell him about the money, not even John. On the streets, she had learned that trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. "You hungry?" he asked, taking a piece of mashed bread out of his pocket and offering it to her. She accepted the bread gratefully, dividing it in two and giving half back to John. They ate in silence, watching the shadows that were beginning to lengthen with the end of the afternoon. "You shouldn't be alone here," John said after a while. "There's some new guys around, bad people. Come stay with us under the overpass." Mia hugged her knees thoughtfully. The overpass was where several homeless people gathered to spend the night. It was safer than being alone, but it also meant more watchful eyes, more people who could discover her secret. "I can't," she mumbled. "I need to stay here." John shrugged and stood up. "It's up to you, Squirt, but be careful. After he left, Mia stared at the sky that was darkening rapidly. Her thoughts returned to Theodore. There was something in his blind eyes that disturbed her, a sadness so deep that she could feel it even without completely understanding it. Night fell upon the city like a heavy blanket. The noises changed, becoming more threatening. Distant sirens, occasional shouts, the sound of breaking bottles. Mia huddled in her corner, covering herself with the thin blanket. The money was safe beneath her, but somehow it didn't bring the comfort it should have. Her small hands found the armless doll, and she hugged it to her chest. It was her only companion on the lonely nights, the only one who heard her whispered fears and dreams. "Do you think he's afraid of the dark too?" she asked the doll softly, thinking of Theodore. Sleep was slow in coming, and when it finally arrived, it brought restless dreams. She dreamed of her mother in the hospital, but this time she transformed into Theodore, looking for a girl with a teardrop-shaped scar. She woke up several times during the night, startled by sudden noises or by the cold that penetrated her bones. The next morning, Mia woke up with the first ray of sunshine. Her body ached from the fitful sleep on the hard ground, and her stomach rumbled with hunger. She took out the hidden money and looked at it again, trying to decide what to do. She could buy food, new clothes, maybe even rent a room in some cheap boarding house. But something stopped her. The money seemed to burn in her hands, as if it carried Theodore's sadness with it. It was then that she made a decision. She put the money back inside the coin can and left her hiding place. She needed to find Theodore again. She didn't know exactly why, but she felt that he needed her as much as she needed him. She walked to the intersection where she had found him the day before. The city's traffic was starting to pick up, and hurried people passed by her without a second glance. She sat down on the sidewalk, hugging her knees, and waited. The hours passed slowly. The sun rose in the sky, bringing with it a suffocating heat. Mia remained there, ignoring the hunger and fatigue. Occasionally she closed her eyes and tried to imagine what it would be like not to be able to see anything, to be eternally plunged into darkness like Theodore. It was then that she saw him. He was walking slowly, his white cane feeling the way ahead. He seemed even paler than the day before, if that was possible. Mia noticed that he was heading beyond the intersection, towards an area where there was a large abandoned construction site. Her small heart sped up as she realized that something was wrong, very wrong. The way Theodore walked, his slumped shoulders, the expression of sad determination on his face. It was as if he was saying goodbye to the world. Misha got up quickly, her body trembling with an urgency she didn't fully understand. She needed to reach him. She needed to stop him from doing something terrible. But before she could take a step in his direction, she saw something that made her freeze in place. Thick tears streamed from under Theodore's dark glasses, glistening in the morning sunlight. They were the tears of someone who had already made a final decision. Tears of someone who saw no more hope in tomorrow. Mia felt a pang in her chest as she saw Theodore approaching the abandoned construction site. Her small, sore feet began to move before she could even think, following him silently. The morning sun cast elongated shadows from the unfinished buildings, creating an even more desolate scene. The construction site was a skeleton of concrete and iron, abandoned for so long that nature was beginning to reclaim it. Weeds grew between the cracks in the concrete, and pigeons had made nests on the upper floors. But what was most striking was the huge pit in the center of the site, a black hole that seemed to swallow all the light around it. Theodore walked with deliberately slow steps, as if he were memorizing every moment. His cane tapped against stones and rubble, but he didn't seem to care about the obstacles. The briefcase was still in his hand, heavy with the money that now seemed to have no meaning. When he reached the edge of the pit, Mia realized that he was crying. Silent tears streamed down her dirty face as she watched the man she had met only a day ago, but who had somehow become important to her, maybe because, like her, he was also lost in the world. "Please don't." Her small voice cut through the morning silence. Theodore startled, turning his head in the direction of the sound. "Mia?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. "What are you doing here?" I was worried," she replied, approaching cautiously. "You seemed too sad." A bitter smile formed on Theodore's lips. "Too sad? Yes, I think that's a good way to describe it." Mia was now a few steps away from him, close enough to see how his hands trembled as he held the cane. "You don't have to do this," she said, her voice carrying a wisdom beyond her years. "Do what?" he asked, trying to sound casual, but his voice betrayed him. "Hurt yourself," she replied simply. "I know that sometimes it hurts so much that we want to disappear, but you don't have to." The girl's words hit Theodore like a punch to the gut. How could a 5-year-old understand so well what he was feeling? How could she see through his darkness with such clarity? "You don't understand," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm no good anymore. I can't work. I can't take care of my family. I can't even see my daughter's face. I'm a dead weight." Mia took another step forward, her bare feet making noise on the loose stones. "But you can still feel," she said. "You can hear, you can talk, you can hug. Isn't that something?" Theodore felt the tears streaming from under his dark glasses. The simplicity and truth in her words completely disarmed him. His legs faltered, and he fell to his knees, dropping the briefcase that made a thud as it hit the ground. It was then that Mia did something unexpected. She walked over to him and hugged him. Her skinny little arms could barely encircle the man's broad shoulders, but there was so much affection in that simple gesture that Theodore felt his heart ache. "I don't have anyone either," she whispered against his shoulder. "But now you're here." Her words were like a key that unlocked something inside Theodore. All the weight of loneliness, bitterness, and self-pity that he had carried for the past few months exploded in uncontrollable sobs. He hugged the girl back, feeling her fragile little body tremble against his. They remained like that for a long time, two lost souls meeting at the edge of the abyss. The sun rose in the sky, warming their backs, while the noise of the city began to increase around them. But at that moment, it was as if the world had stopped. When they finally separated, Theodore asked in a hoarse voice, "Why do you care so much about me?" Mia was silent for a moment, as if pondering the answer. "Because you cared about me too," she said finally. You gave me money, but you didn't take it back even though you knew I was just a street kid. Most people don't even look at me." Her words hit Theodore in a way he didn't expect. It was true. Even in his darkness, even in his despair, he had seen something in that girl that others didn't see. Maybe there was still light inside him after all. "I didn't use the money," continued Mia, reaching into the torn pocket of her dirty dress. "It's here. I wanted to give it back." Theodore reached out, feeling the wad of bills she placed in his palm. "Why didn't you use it?" "Because that's not what I needed," she replied with disarming honesty. "I just wanted not to be alone." The weight of that confession hung between them like a dense cloud. Theodore realized that he was facing a choice. He could continue with his original plan, let himself fall into that dark pit and put an end to everything. Or he could choose a different path, a path that a small street girl had illuminated with her unexpected presence. "Mia," he said, his voice now firmer, Do you want to come with me?" "Where to?" she asked, a touch of hope in her voice. "I don't know yet," he replied honestly, "but maybe we can find out together. You help me see the world, and I'll try to be the family you don't have." The words came out of his mouth before he could think too much about them, but as soon as he spoke them, he knew they were true. Something was being born there, in that unlikely moment, at the edge of a precipice that could have been his end. Mia took his hand, her small fingers intertwining with his, with a confidence that surprised him. "Okay," she said simply, as if that decision was the most natural thing in the world. And so, under the morning sun that was now shining in full force, a blind man and a street girl began to walk away from the pit. They didn't know where they were going. They didn't have a definite plan. But for the first time in a long time, they both felt something they had long forgotten: hope. The briefcase was left behind, forgotten among the rubble of the abandoned construction site. The money it contained no longer mattered. The real treasure was in the hesitant steps they took together, in the warmth of their intertwined hands, in the silent promise not to leave each other alone again. The first few hours after leaving the abandoned construction site were the hardest. Theodore and Mia walked aimlessly through the city streets, he guided by his cane and the girl's small hand, she carrying her whole life in a faded plastic bag. The armless doll, the torn blanket, and the can with a few coins. The midday heat was relentless, and soon sweat was dripping down both of their faces. Mia began to limp slightly, her sore feet protesting against the hot asphalt. Theodore noticed the change in her step and stopped. "You're hurt," he said, not as a question but as a statement. "Just a little," Mia replied, trying to sound brave. "I'm used to it." Those words hit Theodore like a punch to the gut. A child shouldn't be used to pain. He felt around in the pockets of his rumpled suit jacket and found what was left of the money that Mia had tried to return. "We need to buy you shoes," he declared, "and food. When was the last time you had something decent to eat?" Mia was silent for a moment, as if trying to remember. "John gave me a piece of bread yesterday," she said finally, "but before that, I don't really remember." Theodore's heart ached even more. In his previous life, he had never really thought about the children he saw on the streets. They were like shadows passing on the periphery of his consciousness, something he preferred not to see. Now, ironically, when he could no longer see, he was finally beginning to see for real. "There's a shoe store nearby," said Mia, gently pulling his hand. "I always stop at the window to look, but they never let me in." The store was small, one of those neighborhood stores that sell simpler products. When they entered, the bell on the door announced their arrival, and Theodore could feel the air conditioning on his face. He also felt the exact moment when the atmosphere changed, the sudden silence, the tension in the air. "Can I help you?" a female voice asked, the polite tone barely disguising the suspicion. Yes, replied Theodore, holding his head high. I need shoes for her. He hesitated for a moment. What were they to each other now? There were no words to define that strange and sudden bond that had formed between them. The saleswoman, Theodore could hear the sound of her heels approaching, seemed uncertain. Sir, we have a policy. Money, Theodore interrupted, taking some bills out of his pocket. I have money to pay, and we'll also need socks. And if you have any extra sandals, it would be good to have an option for hot days. Something in the tone of his voice, or perhaps the amount of money he showed, made the saleswoman change her attitude. Of course. I'll get some options. What's her size? I don't know, admitted Theodore. I've never worn real shoes, said Mia quietly, squeezing his hand tighter. The saleswoman made a soft sound, something between surprise and pity. I'll measure her foot first, then. The next few minutes were a surreal experience. Theodore listened to the saleswoman, who now introduced herself as Clara, exclaiming about the condition of Mia's feet, about how they needed to be treated, about how absurd it was for a child to walk barefoot through the city. These sores need ointment, said Clara. There's a drugstore next door. You should go there afterward. Mia tried on several pairs of shoes, and Theodore could hear her hesitant little steps in the store, as if she were learning to walk again. Is this one comfortable? He asked with each pair she tested. It's different, she replied, but good different. They ended up taking 3 pairs, sneakers for everyday wear, sandals for the heat, and a more sturdy pair of shoes for rainy days. Clara insisted on including several pairs of socks in the package and even a small kit of foot care products. When they left the store, Mia was wearing the new sneakers, her steps more firm and secure. It feels like I'm walking on clouds, she said, a hint of joy in her voice that Theodore hadn't yet heard. They went to the drugstore where they bought ointments and bandages. Then they stopped at a small diner. The smell of food made Mia's stomach rumble audibly. I want one of each, said Theodore when the waitress came to take their order. One of each what? Asked the waitress, confused. Of the savory snacks and soda. And then we'll want dessert. Mia was silent as the food arrived. Theodore could hear her accelerated breathing, the soft sound of her fingers drumming on the formica table. You can eat, he said softly. It's okay. And she ate. She ate like someone who hasn't seen food for days, which was probably true. Between bites, she told Theodore about the things she saw through the diner window, the cars passing, the people walking, a dog sleeping on the sidewalk. It was during dessert, a chocolate sundae that made Mia let out little sounds of joy, that the reality began to weigh on them. Night was coming, and they needed a place to stay. We can't go back to the hotel, Theodore said, more to himself than to Mia. The hotel meant possible tracking, meant questions, meant having to explain the unexplainable. I know a place, Mia said hesitantly. Under the river bridge. There's other people there, but there's space. John said it's safer than being alone. Theodore felt a lump in his throat. Was this what his life had come to, sleeping under a bridge with a street kid? But then he remembered the pit at the abandoned construction site, the emptiness he had felt, the decision he had almost made. Anything was better than that. Do you have a blanket? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady. I have mine, Mia replied, but we can buy another one for you. There's a dollar store on the way. And so, as the sun began to set, a blind ex-businessman and a street girl with new shoes walked towards the river bridge, carrying shopping bags that contained their basic necessities: blankets, cheap pillows, toothbrushes, bottled water. As they walked, Mia continued to be his eyes, describing everything she saw, and for the first time since losing his sight, Theodore felt that he could truly see the world through the innocent and sincere eyes of a child who, despite all the pain and abandonment, could still find beauty in the small things. "Look!" she exclaimed suddenly. "There's a bird making a nest in that tree, and the sky is all pink. It looks like cotton candy." Theodore squeezed her small hand, feeling a different emotion growing in his chest. It was no longer the suffocating despair of the last few months, nor the bitterness that had consumed him. It was something softer, gentler, something that looked a lot like hope. The river bridge awaited them, with its shadows and uncertainties, but now at least they were no longer alone. Life under the bridge was unlike anything Theodore had ever experienced. The ground was hard and uneven. The air had a peculiar smell of dampness and smoke, and the sounds were a constant symphony of sad stories. Distant crying, dry coughs, whispers, and occasionally shouts that echoed in the night. Mia had chosen a more secluded corner for them, near one of the concrete pillars. With cardboard boxes they found along the way, they improvised a kind of wall, creating a minimum of privacy. The new blankets were spread over more cardboard, creating an improvised bed. "It's not so bad," Mia said, trying to sound optimistic as she arranged her few belongings. "And at least the rain doesn't get us as wet here." Theodore sat on the blanket, his back supported against the cold pillar. His fingers traced invisible patterns on the concrete as he tried to adapt to the new sounds and smells. The suit he wore, once impeccable, was now rumpled and dirty, out of place in that environment as he himself felt. "There's more people coming," Mia whispered, approaching him. "It's John with the others." Footsteps approached, and Theodore could feel the presence of several people. The smell of cigarette smoke became stronger. "So it's true," said a young male voice. It must be John. The squirt really found herself some company. "Hi, John," Mia replied, her voice small but firm. "This is Theodore. He's my friend." There was a moment of tense silence, broken only by the sound of the river flowing under the bridge. "He's blind," John continued, not as a question, but as a statement. "And it looks like he has money, or at least he did. The squirt's shoes are new." Theodore felt Mia move closer to him, as if she wanted to protect him. The irony of the situation did not escape him. A 5-year-old child trying to defend an adult man. "We don't want any trouble," Theodore said, keeping his voice calm. "We just need a place to stay." "Everyone needs a place to stay," John replied. "But not everyone gets one. Why should you?" It was Mia who answered, her voice trembling slightly. "Because he was going to hurt himself, John. Just like Pedro did last year, remember? I didn't let him do that. Now we're taking care of each other." The silence that followed was heavy. Theodore could hear different breaths, whispers, the sound of feet moving on the concrete. Finally, John spoke again, his voice softer. "Pedro was a good kid. He couldn't handle the streets." A pause. "Okay, Squirt, you can stay, but if he tries anything funny, he won't," Mia interrupted with conviction. "He's good. He's just lost like I was." The footsteps moved away, and Theodore let out the breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He felt Mia's small hand find his in the dark. "John's okay," she said. "It's just that he's seen a lot of bad stuff. Everyone here has." The next few hours were an exercise in adaptation. Mia explained every detail of their new environment, where the improvised bathroom was, a more remote corner, where people used to make fires to cook, which areas were considered territory of other groups. As the night wore on, the cold began to increase. Mia huddled next to Theodore, sharing her body heat. She held her armless doll, talking quietly to it as she did every night. "This is Rose," she explained to Theodore. "I found her in the trash a long time ago. She doesn't have a family either, so we stay together." Theodore reached out and Mia placed the doll in it. His fingers ran over the worn plastic, feeling the imperfections, the places where the arms had been broken, the tangled synthetic hair. "She's special," he said, returning the doll. "Just like you." Mia was silent for a moment, then asked in a low voice, "What's your daughter like?" The question caught Theodore by surprise. His heart ached as he thought of Laura, her smile, her laughter that he would never see again. She's 6 years old," he began, his voice hoarse. "Light brown hair, big eyes. She loves to draw, and she's afraid of thunder. Whenever it rains, she comes running to my room." His voice faltered, and he felt the tears begin to form. Mia squeezed his hand. "You miss her," she said. It wasn't a question. "Very much," he admitted. "But I can't go back. Not like this. I don't want her to see me this way." "What way?" "Broken, useless, a father who can't even see the drawings she makes." Mia shifted beside him, and he felt something being placed in his lap. It was the doll. "Rose is broken too," she said. "But I still love her. I still want her with me." The girl's simple words hit Theodore with full force. Tears streamed from under his dark glasses, and he hugged the doll to his chest. "Sometimes," Mia continued, her voice sleepy, "we don't have to be whole to be loved, we just have to be here." The sound of the river continued constant under their feet, an urban lullaby for the homeless. Gradually, Mia's breathing became deeper and more regular. She had fallen asleep. Theodore stayed awake for a long time, holding the armless doll and thinking about the girl's words. In his previous life, he had everything: money, status, a perfect family. Now he was sleeping under a bridge, sharing a blanket with a street child. And yet, in some strange way, he felt less lost than in recent months, as if Mia, in her innocent wisdom, was slowly helping him find parts of himself that he had lost long before he lost his sight. A distant scream startled him, someone having nightmares, maybe. Instinctively, he pulled Mia closer, protecting her. She mumbled something in her sleep and snuggled closer. "Just have to be here," he repeated softly, her words echoing in his mind. And for the first time since the accident, Theodore allowed himself to simply be, broken, lost, but still present, still alive, still capable of offering comfort to a small soul as wounded as his own. The night wore on, bringing with it silent promises of different days ahead. Days that, even in the darkness, could contain their own form of light. The first week under the bridge passed like a hazy dream. Theodore and Mia created their own routine, adapting to their new reality day after day. In the morning, they were awakened by the noise of the heavy traffic above their heads. Mia always woke up first, her watchful eyes observing the movement of the people she called the Bridge family. The money that was left was running out quickly, even buying only the essentials: food, water, and basic hygiene products. Theodore knew that they would soon need to find a way to survive. They couldn't depend on savings forever. On a particularly cold morning, while sharing a bread roll with coffee in a thermos they had bought, Mia made a suggestion that would change everything. "We could sell flowers," she said, blowing on the hot coffee. "Before I met you, I saw a lady who sold flowers at an intersection. She always looked happy, and people were nicer to her." Theodore pondered the idea. Selling flowers. It was something dignified, something they could do together. He couldn't see the flowers, but he could feel their scent, their texture. And Mia would be his eyes, as she already was in everything else. "Where would we get the flowers?" he asked. "There's a flower market," Mia replied excitedly. "It's close to here. People go very early to buy. We could go there, see how much it costs." John, who was nearby and had heard the conversation, approached. In recent days, he had become a kind of informal protector of the unusual duo. "The market opens at 4 in the morning, he informed them. "If you go, I'll come with you. That place can be dangerous for those who don't know it." And so, the next morning, long before sunrise, The three made their first expedition to the flower market. The place was a labyrinth of colors and aromas, with merchants shouting prices and buyers negotiating loudly. Mia described everything to Theodore in her peculiar way. There are red roses that look like velvet, daisies that look like little white stars. And look, those purple flowers look like tiny butterflies. With the help of John, who knew some vendors, they got a good price on a batch of assorted flowers. Theodore insisted on buying a small bucket to keep them fresh, and some colorful ribbons to make arrangements. Back at the bridge, Mia showed a surprising talent for arranging the flowers. Her small hands worked delicately, combining colors and shapes that she described in detail to Theodore. This rose matches this, and carnation, because they're the same color as the sunset, she explained. And these daisies look like little smiles in the middle of the bouquet. For days, they set up shop at a busy intersection. Mia held the arrangements, and Theodore stood by her side, his adult presence offering a sense of security that she had never had before when she lived alone on the streets. People began to notice the unusual duo, a blind man and a little girl selling flowers. There was something about that image that touched the hearts of passers-by. Some stopped to talk. Others bought flowers even without needing them, just to help. But it wasn't all flowers. On a particularly hot afternoon, while selling the last arrangements of the day, a familiar voice froze Theodore's blood. "Mr. Theodore, my God, is that really you?" It was Clara, his former secretary. He would recognize that voice anywhere. She had worked with him for over 10 years. "Clara," he replied, feeling his heart race. "Please, everyone's been going crazy looking for you," she exclaimed, her voice mixing relief and disbelief. "Your wife, your daughter, the police. What happened? Why are you here? And who is this girl?" Mia moved closer to Theodore, grabbing his hand tightly. She could feel the fear emanating from him, the tension in his shoulders. "Clara," he said, keeping his voice low, "I beg you not to tell anyone you saw me. Please, I'm not ready. I can't." "But your family is suffering," Clara insisted. "Laura cries every day calling for you. Marina is on the verge of a nervous breakdown. How can you do this to them?" Each word was like a knife in Theodore's heart. Mia, realizing his anguish, stepped forward. "He's not ready," she said, her voice small but firm. "Please don't hurt him anymore." Clara looked at the girl in astonishment, noticing for the first time her feet in the new but already worn sneakers, her clean but clearly used dress, her eyes that carried a wisdom beyond her age. "Are you living on the street?" she asked Theodore, her voice now softer. "With this child?" "We're taking care of each other," he replied simply. Clara was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was choked. "I'll buy all the flowers that are left," she said, "and I won't tell anyone I saw you. But Theodore, think about what you're doing. Think about Laura." After she left, taking with her the last arrangements of the day, Theodore and Mia stood motionless at the intersection. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with colors that only Mia could see. "Your daughter cries for you," she said softly. "Just like I cried for my mom." The words hit Theodore like a punch to the gut. Tears began to stream from under his dark glasses. "I can't go back," he whispered. "I don't know how to be a father like this. I don't know how to be a husband like this. I don't know how to be anything like this." Mia let go of his hand, and for a moment Theodore felt completely lost. Then he felt her little arms wrapping around his waist in a tight hug. "You know how to be my friend," she said. "You know how to protect me, make me laugh, teach me things. That's not being nothing, it's being everything." The sound of traffic continued around them, horns and engines forming the soundtrack of the city. But at that moment, for Theodore, the only sound that mattered was the voice of that little girl, who, in her innocent wisdom, could see through his darkness with a clarity that he himself did not possess. "What if I can't do it?" he asked, his voice breaking. What if I only hurt them more, like I did before I ran away? Then we try again, Mia replied simply. Just like when I mess up a flower arrangement. I take it all apart and start again until it looks pretty. Her words echoed in Theodore's mind as they walked back to the bridge, carrying the empty bucket and the money from the day's sales. Starting over. Was it possible to rebuild a life that had been completely shattered? And more importantly, was it fair to drag Mia into the middle of that attempt? That night, while the girl slept huddled beside him, hugging her armless doll, Theodore stayed awake for hours, thinking about Clara's words, about Laura's crying, about Marina's pain, and above all, thinking about the little warrior that fate had placed in his path, a child who, even having lost everything, could still see beauty in the small moments, could still create art with flowers and hope with simple words. The days that followed the encounter with Clara were marked by a silent tension. Theodore was quieter, lost in thoughts he didn't share. Mia noticed the change in him, the way his shoulders seemed to carry an even greater weight, how his hands trembled slightly when they made sales at the intersection. On a particularly cold morning, while they were arranging the flowers for the day, John approached with a worried expression on his face. "People are asking about you," he said in a low voice. "A well-dressed woman came by here last night showing photos on her cell phone, asking if anyone had seen a blind man with a little girl." Theodore felt the blood run cold in his veins. "Marina," he murmured. "Clara must have told her." "No," protested Mia, grabbing his hand. "She promised." "Maybe it wasn't her," John pondered. "You sell flowers in the same place every day. Someone might have recognized you, said something." Fear settled in Theodore's heart. Not for what might happen to him, but for Mia. What would happen to her when they found out that a missing man was living on the streets with a child who wasn't his? The authorities would certainly be called. Mia would be taken to some institution, would return to the system that had already failed her so many times before. "We need to get out of here," he said, standing up abruptly. "We can't stay any longer." "But what about the flowers?" asked Mia, her voice trembling. "And our little corner, and John." The pain in her voice was palpable, and Theodore felt his heart ache. In a few weeks they had built a routine, a simple but honest life. The flowers brought not only sustenance, but also a purpose. It was the first time Mia had had anything resembling stability since she was abandoned. "I know a place," John said, after a moment of silence. "There's a community under the train trestle on the other side of town. It's further from downtown, less visible. You could start over there." "Is it safe?" Theodore asked, his hand squeezing Mia's. "As safe as any place can be for people like us," John replied, with a touch of bitterness. "But there are more families there, other children. Maybe it would be better for the squirt." Mia was unusually silent, and Theodore could feel the tremor in her small hand. "What do you think?" he asked softly. "I don't want to go," she replied in a choked voice, "but I also don't want them to take me away from you." The simplicity of her answer hit Theodore with full force. In such a short time they had become everything to each other, an improvised family built on shared losses and pain. That night, as they packed their few belongings, the rain began to fall. The sound of the drops hitting the structure of the bridge created a melancholy melody, as if the sky itself were crying for yet another farewell in Mia's life. "Can I take just one more thing?" she asked timidly. "Of course," replied Theodore. "What is it?" She placed something in his hands. It was a flower. By the touch, he recognized a rose, its petals still soft, despite the long day of exposure. "It's the first flower we sold together," she explained. "I dried it in a newspaper. Like the flower lady taught me, that way it lasts forever." Theodore held the flower carefully, feeling its fragility. How could something so delicate survive the time, preserving its shape even after it was dry? Maybe it was like that with the bonds we create, he thought. Even in the most adverse circumstances, some kinds of love manage to preserve themselves. John insisted on accompanying them to the new location. The trip was long, crossing the city in the middle of the night. Mia described the way in whispers, as she always did, but her voice was filled with sadness. "There's a really big moon in the sky," she said. "It looks like it's sad too, all covered in dark clouds." When they finally arrived at the train trestle, dawn was almost breaking. The place was different from the bridge, wider, quieter, with a strong smell of grass and wet earth. The occasional sound of a train passing above made the ground tremble slightly. "There are several families here," John explained as he guided them. "Most of them work with recycling. They're good people. They just need to get to know you first." They found a space near one of the support columns. It was more protected from the wind than their old place, and the ground seemed drier. John helped set up their new corner using cardboard boxes and tarpaulins he had gotten along the way. "I'll try to come visit when I can," he said, his voice revealing an emotion he was trying to hide. "Take care of the squirt, Theodore, and you, Shorty, take care of him too." After John left, the silence weighed between them. Mia snuggled next to Theodore, hugging her armless doll tightly. He could feel that she was crying silently. "You know, what I miss most about the bridge?" she asked after a long time. "The sound of the river. It was like a lullaby." "Here we have the sound of the trains," Theodore replied, trying to find something positive. "It's like they're telling us stories of faraway places." "What kind of stories?" "Well, that train that's passing now, it must be coming back from the coast. Maybe it saw the sea earlier today with the sun rising on the water, turning everything into liquid gold." "I've never seen the sea," said Mia dreamily. "What's it like?" Theodore took a deep breath, searching his memories from before the accident. "It's like a giant hug of blue water. The waves make a noise that sounds like a deep sigh, and the sand is soft under your feet. When the wind blows, it brings a smell of salt and freedom." "Are we going to see the sea someday?" she asked, her voice full of hope. The question hit Theodore like a punch to the gut. How could he promise something like that? They barely had. Enough to survive, living on flowers and the occasional kindness of others. "Someday," he replied, even knowing that it was a promise he might not be able to keep. The first few days in the new place were difficult. The other families watched them with suspicion, mainly because of Theodore, a clearly educated man with manners different from theirs. But Mia, with her natural ability to touch hearts, gradually broke down the barriers. She played with the other children, shared the stories that Theodore told her, and soon her laughter mixed with the others that echoed under the trestle. The mothers began to look at her with softer eyes, sometimes offering a plate of food or a used garment that no longer fit their own children. They continued selling flowers, but now at a different intersection, further from downtown. The earnings were smaller, but at least they felt safer. Theodore taught Mia to count the money correctly, and she proved to be a diligent student, eager to learn. On a particularly cold night, while sharing a thin blanket, Mia asked something she had been holding in for days. "Theo," she now called him that, a nickname that sounded like affection in her childish voice. "Do you think your daughter still remembers you?" The question caught him off guard. "Why are you thinking about that?" "Because sometimes," she hesitated, "sometimes I try to remember my mom's face, but I can't anymore. It's like she's disappearing from my memory, like a drawing in the sand when the rain comes." Theodore felt the tears forming. He pulled Mia closer, wrapping her in a protective hug. "Laura will never forget me," he said, his voice choked, "because I'm the monster who abandoned her." "You're not a monster," protested Mia vehemently. Monsters don't tell beautiful stories, don't make people smile with flowers, don't hold our hand when we're scared. But I abandoned my own daughter. Just like my mom abandoned me? She asked softly. The question hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Theodore felt as if his heart was being crushed. No, he replied finally. Your mum. Something must have happened. No one abandons a treasure like you without a very strong reason. So maybe, she said, her voice sleepy, you also have a strong reason. But reasons can change, right? Like the seasons you taught me. After winter always comes spring. Theodore stayed awake long after Mia fell asleep, thinking about her words. Spring after winter. Was it possible? His fingers found the dried rose that Mia had saved, now carefully wrapped in a piece of paper and kept in the pocket of his worn suit jacket. A flower that survived the time, preserving its beauty even after death. Maybe there was a lesson there, he thought. Maybe not everything that seems lost is really over. Life under the train trestle had found its own rhythm. The mornings began early, with the noise of the first trains and the movement of the families who left to work with recycling. Mia had become a beloved figure in the community, especially among the other children, who followed her fascinated as she told the stories she learned from Theodore. On a particularly cold August morning, something different happened. Mia was helping Theodore organize the flowers for the day when she heard a commotion. A woman was screaming, desperate, calling for help. "What's going on?" asked Theodore, feeling the agitation around him. "It's Maria," replied Mia, her body tense. "Her baby is sick, very sick." Maria's baby, a boy of just 8 months, had had a high fever for 2 days. The mother, a young woman who lived alone after being abandoned by her husband, had no money for medication. "Take him to the hospital," someone shouted. "I've tried," replied Maria between sobs. "They make us wait for hours and hours. Last time they didn't even treat us properly." Theodore squeezed Mia's hand. "How much do we have saved?" he asked softly. Mia ran to the hiding place where they kept the flower money, a small can buried near the column of the trestle. It was the savings they made for bad days, for when they couldn't sell enough. "There's $217, she said, after carefully counting as Theodore had taught. Theodore didn't hesitate. "Take it all," he said, "and take me to where Maria is." Mia guided him through the groups of people who were crowding around the young mother. The baby was crying with a weak, frightening sound, his small body burning with fever. "Maria," called Theodore, reaching out with the money. "Take a taxi and take your son to the hospital now. Insist on treatment. Don't leave there until he is properly medicated." But I can't accept," protested Maria, her voice choked. "It's all your money." "Yes, you can," interrupted Mia. "Please, help the baby." Theodore's gesture had a profound impact on the community. That night, as he and Mia prepared to sleep without dinner, the food money had gone along with the savings. Several people appeared bringing some food, sharing what little they had. "We don't forget who helps us," said Jose, an older man who collected cardboard while offering a plate of still warm soup. 3 days later, Maria returned with the baby, already recovered after treatment with antibiotics. She was crying, but now with gratitude. "I'll never forget what you did," she said, hugging Mia and then Theodore. "If it wasn't for you..." She didn't complete the sentence, but she didn't need to. Everyone there knew well the tragic end that many stories had when there was no money for medical treatment. It was that night, while Mia slept leaning against his shoulder, that Theodore had a painful epiphany. The money they had used to save Maria's baby was exactly the kind of amount that, in his previous life, he spent without thinking on a dinner, out with the family. How many lives could have been saved with the money he wasted? How many children like Mia needed help while he lived in his bubble of privileges? Guilt consumed him. But there was something more. a strange sense of purpose. For the first time since losing his sight, he felt that he had done something truly meaningful. "Theo?" Mia's sleepy voice brought him back from his thoughts. "Are you crying?" He hadn't noticed the tears that were streaming from under his dark glasses. "I'm thinking," he replied, his voice hoarse. "Thinking about how strange life is. Sometimes we need to lose everything to find what really matters." "Like the flowers?" she asked. "They die in the winter but come back in the spring." "Yes, little one, exactly like the flowers." In the days that followed, something changed in the dynamic of the community. People no longer saw Theodore and Mia as outsiders. They had become part of that improvised family under the trestle. The children began to gather every night to listen to the stories that Theodore told. He discovered that even without being able to see, he could create entire worlds with words. He talked about the sea that Mia so wanted to know, about the stars that shone above the trestle, about faraway places and magical adventures. One night, while telling the story of a girl who transformed sadness into flowers, Theodore heard a sound that made him freeze. It was a childish voice, painfully familiar, calling "Daddy" in the crowd of children. His heart stopped for a moment, but soon he realized that it was just the daughter of one of the cardboard collectors. The voice was similar to Laura's, but it wasn't her. The pain of longing hit him with full force. Mia, always attentive to his emotions, squeezed his hand. "Tell more of the story," she asked, trying to distract him. "What happened after the girl found the secret garden?" Theodore swallowed the lump in his throat and continued the story, but his mind was far away. He thought of Laura, of how she used to curl up in his lap asking for "One more story, Daddy, just one more." He thought of Marina, of how she must be suffering with his disappearance. Later, when everyone had already turned in, Mia asked a question that caught him off guard. "If you could see again, what would you want to see first?" Theodore thought for a moment. "My daughter's face," he answered honestly. "And yours?" "My face isn't pretty," she said softly. "It's always dirty and my front teeth are broken." "To me, you're beautiful," he replied, pulling her into a hug. "Because the beauty that matters is the one that comes from here." And he touched her chest lightly, where her heart beat. "Then why don't you go back?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "If the beauty that matters is the one in the heart, your family would understand. They would love you even without you being able to see." The question hung in the air, heavy as the storm clouds that were forming above the trestle. Theodore had no answer, or perhaps he was afraid of the answer that his heart wanted to give. The sound of a train passing above them filled the silence, making the ground tremble slightly. It was as if the world itself was shaking Theodore, trying to wake him from a dream that had lasted too long. The arrival of September brought with it warmer winds and a change in the air that Theodore could feel, even without seeing. The morning started earlier with the singing of birds that had nested in the structures of the trestle. But along with the promise of spring came also the news that would change everything. It was on a particularly difficult sales afternoon. The heat had spoiled several flowers, and they had barely made enough to buy food. Mia was quieter than normal, and Theodore could feel that something was bothering her. "What is it, little one?" he asked, as they were putting away the few flowers that were left. Mia took a while to answer, and when she did, her voice was filled with fear. "There's a woman who passes by the bus stop every day. She keeps looking at us. Today she was taking pictures with her cell phone." Theodore's heart raced. "What does she look like?" "Pretty," replied Mia. "Long black hair, wears fancy clothes, and she was crying while she was taking the pictures." Marina. It could only be Marina. After all these months, she still hadn't given up looking for him. That night, the trestle community was agitated. Jose, who always brought news from the street, confirmed Theodore's fears. "There are posters with your picture all over the city," he said, offering a reward for anyone who gives information. The police are also looking. They say it's because of the girl. They're suspecting kidnapping. The word kidnapping fell like a bomb. Mia, who was half asleep in Theodore's lap, sat up suddenly, clinging to him tightly. "Don't let them take me," she begged, the panic evident in her voice. "Please, Theo, don't let them." "No one is going to take you," he promised, hugging her tightly. But deep down, he knew it was a promise he might not be able to keep. Maria, who since the episode with her baby had become a close friend, approached with a suggestion. "My sister lives in a small town, about 5 hours from here. She could take you in for a while until things calm down." It was a tempting offer, the chance to escape, to protect Mia, to continue with the life they had built together. But something inside Theodore had changed. Mia's words about returning home, about the beauty of the heart, had planted a seed that was now beginning to sprout. "We can't keep running," he said finally, his voice hoarse. "It's not fair to you, little one. It's not fair to my family. It's not fair to anyone." "But what if they send me back to the orphanage?" asked Mia, her voice trembling. "What if I never see you again?" The pain in her voice was palpable, and Theodore felt his heart break. How to explain to a 5-year-old child that sometimes love means making difficult choices? "Listen to me," he said, holding her little face in his hands. "Remember the story of the girl who transformed sadness into flowers? Do you know why she was able to do that?" "Because she had love in her heart," replied Mia, sniffing. "Exactly. And we have it too, a lot of love. So much love that it doesn't fit just here under the trestle. It needs to grow, to blossom, to spread like the flowers we sell." "I don't understand," she murmured. "I didn't understand either," admitted Theodore. "I spent months running because I thought I didn't deserve love, that I was too broken to be a father, a husband, a person. But you taught me, little one. You taught me that even broken, we can be whole in what matters." The people around listened in silence. Some cried discreetly, others nodded in understanding. Everyone there knew well the weight of difficult choices, of interrupted loves, of postponed dreams. "What if," Mia hesitated, "what if your family doesn't like me?" The question hit Theodore like an arrow. In all his fears and worries, he hadn't considered that Mia also carried her own fears of rejection. "Impossible not to like you," he replied with conviction. "Laura always wanted a sister. And Marina has so much love to give. She just needs a chance to show it. How do you know? Because she's still looking for me, even after all this time, even after I hurt her so much. That's true love, little one, and true love always has room for more." That night, while the community slept, Theodore and Mia stayed awake, planning their next steps. They decided that the next day they would go to the same bus stop where Marina had been seen. "I'm scared," admitted Mia, her voice small in the darkness. "Me too," replied Theodore, "but you know what's stronger than fear? Hope. And we have a lot of hope, don't we? Like the flowers that come back in the spring? Exactly like that." The sound of the trains continued above them, but now it seemed different. It was no longer a lullaby for lost souls, but a song of change, of movement, of transformation. Theodore held the dried rose that Mia had saved, their first symbol of hope. Tomorrow would be a day of new beginnings, of bridges being rebuilt, of hearts meeting again. And even if the road was difficult, even if there were tears and pain, there was also the certainty that true love always finds a way to flourish, even in the most unlikely places, like the flowers that break, the asphalt, like the hope that sprouts in broken hearts, like the light that always finds a crack to shine, even in the deepest darkness. The morning arrived with a fine mist that covered the city. Theodore and Mia woke up before sunrise, their hearts heavy with the importance of what they were about to do. The Trestle community was also awake, all wanting to help in some way in this crucial moment. Maria brought clean clothes that she had washed during the night, her daughter's best dress for Mia, and a shirt and pants that she managed to borrow for Theodore. Jose showed up with a new comb, bought especially for the occasion. Carmen, who sold breakfast on the street, insisted on bringing warm bread and coffee with milk. "To give you strength," she said, helping Mia to eat while other women tried to do something with her unruly hair. Theodore could feel the movement around him, hear the whispers of encouragement, feel the affection of that improvised family that had welcomed them. His heart was divided between gratitude for all this love and fear of what was to come. "Theo," called Mia softly, her small hand finding his. "Can I take Rose?" He knew she was referring to her armless doll, her first and most faithful companion on the streets. "Of course you can," he replied. "She's part of our story." As they walked to the bus stop, Mia described everything around them in even more detail than usual, as if she wanted to record every moment in her memory. "The sky is the color of cotton candy today," she said, "and there's a blue bird following us. I think it wants to give us good luck." They arrived early at the stop, which was still empty. Theodore could feel the rising sun warming his face, bringing with it the promise of a new day. Mia was restless beside him, squeezing the doll against her chest. "What if she doesn't come today?" asked the girl after a few minutes of waiting. "She'll come," replied Theodore, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "Marina has always been persistent. It's one of the things that made me fall in love with her." "How did you meet?" The question caught Theodore by surprise. In all these months together, he had never told this story to Mia. "It was in a library," he began, a soft smile forming on his lips as he recalled. "I was studying for an important exam, and she worked there part-time to pay for college. One day, I knocked over a huge pile of books, and she came to help me pick them up. When our eyes met—" "What happened?" asked Mia, fascinated. "It was as if the whole world had stopped. You know when you look straight at the sun and then close your eyes and you still see that little light shining? It was like that. Even after she left, I could still see her smile shining in my thoughts. And then I started knocking. Over books on purpose," he laughed. "Every day I knocked something over just so she would come help me, until one day she said, 'You know, it would be easier if you just asked me out for coffee.'" Mia laughed, a crystal-clear sound that echoed in the street that was beginning to awaken. "She's smart, very smart," agreed Theodore, "and kind and strong and—" His voice died in his throat. Even without being able to see, he knew. He felt the change in the air, heard the soft sound of heels approaching, smelled the familiar perfume, a mixture of jasmine and coffee that always made him think of lazy Sunday mornings. "It's her," whispered Mia, squeezing his hand tightly. Time seemed to freeze. Theodore could hear his heart beating in his ears, felt the tremor in his hands, the lump in his throat that threatened to suffocate him. "Baldo?" Marina's voice, so familiar and at the same time so distant, hit him like a wave. It was hoarser than he remembered, filled with emotion and disbelief. "Marina," he managed to say, his own voice failing. There was a sound of hurried steps, and then she was there, her hands touching his face urgently, as if she needed to make sure he was real. "You idiot!" she sobbed. "You big idiot!" And then she was hugging him, and he could feel her tears wetting his neck, could feel the tremor of her body, could feel all the love and all the pain that he had caused overflowing in that moment. Mia had let go of his hand and taken a step, back hugging Rose tightly, watching the reunion with a mixture of fascination and fear. It was Marina who noticed her first, separating herself slightly from Theodore, but keeping a hand on his arm, as if she feared he might disappear again. "And you must be Mia," she said softly. The girl took another step back, her voice very small when she replied, Are you going to send me away?" The sound that escaped Marina's throat was something between a sob and a laugh. "Oh, honey," she said, crouching down to be at Mia's height. "You brought my husband back home. How could I send you away?" It was then that a new voice cut through the air, a voice that made Theodore's heart stop for a moment. "Daddy." Laura. His little Laura was there. The sound of Laura's hurried footsteps echoed on the sidewalk as she ran towards her father. Theodore fell to his knees, guided both by emotion and by the need to be at his daughter's height. The impact of the small body against his almost knocked him over, and he hugged her with all the strength he had, smelling the familiar scent of baby shampoo and chocolate cookies. "You disappeared," sobbed Laura, her small arms tight around her father's neck. "You promised you would never disappear." Each word was a knife in Theodore's heart. Yes, he had promised. How many promises had he broken? How many moments had he missed? "Forgive me, princess," he whispered, the tears streaming freely from under his dark glasses. "Forgive me." Mia watched the scene with a mixture of emotions on her little face. She held Rose so tightly that her fingers were white. Marina perceived the girl's discomfort and gently reached out to her. "Come here," she called softly. "There's room for one more in this hug." Mia hesitated, looking at Theodore as if asking for permission. He nodded, still hugging Laura. "Go there, little one," he said, his voice choked. "It's time to join our families." With hesitant steps, Mia approached. Marina enveloped her in a gentle hug, and together they joined Theodore and Laura. For a moment they remained like that, a small circle of love and tears in the middle of the sidewalk. Laura was the first to separate, looking curiously at Mia. "You took care of my dad?" she asked. Mia nodded shyly. "He took care of me too." "So you're like my sister now?" The innocent question made all the adults hold their breath. It was Marina who had the most difficult answer to give, but before she could say anything, Laura continued, "Because I always wanted a sister. And you seem nice. What doll is that?" "It's Rose," replied Mia, a small smile beginning to form on her lips. "She doesn't have arms, but she's still special." "Like Daddy," exclaimed Laura. "He can't see, but he's still special." The simplicity of child logic hit Theodore with full force. All this time, he had considered himself broken, incomplete, less than he was before. But through the eyes of his daughter, through the heart of Mia, he was still special. He was still whole in what really mattered. Marina, who had remained silent watching the girls' interaction, finally spoke. "We need to talk about a lot of things, Baldo," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "About what happened, about the future, about how we're going to make this work. But now, at this moment, I just want to take my family home, all of it." The word "all" made Mia lift her head abruptly, her eyes wide with hope and fear. I can go too?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Of course you can," replied Laura, before any adult could speak. "You can sleep in my room. I have a bunk bed, did you know? I always wanted someone to sleep on the top bunk." But Mia still seemed insecure. She looked at the trestle in the distance, where she knew her street friends would be waiting for news. "Can we go say goodbye to them?" she asked Theodore. "To John, to Maria, to the baby, to everyone?" "Of course we can," replied Marina, surprising everyone. "In fact, I'd like to meet them. I need to thank the people who took care of you when I couldn't." The walk to the trestle was an emotional journey. Laura wouldn't let go of her father's hand, as if she feared he might disappear again. Mia held Marina's hand, guiding the group along paths she knew so well. From time to time, she looked up, as if she still didn't believe this was really happening. When they arrived at the trestle, they were greeted by the entire community. Maria was the first to approach, her baby in her arms, now healthy and smiling. "So it worked out," she said, tears in her eyes. "I knew it would. John was further back, trying to maintain his usual tough guy pose, but his eyes shone with emotion. "Take good care of the squirt," he said to Marina. "She's special." "I know," replied Marina, surprising everyone by hugging John. "Thank you for taking care of my family when I couldn't." The goodbyes were long and emotional. Each person who had been part of their life under the trestle wanted to give a hug, say a kind word, make a request to not forget about us. Jose was the last to say goodbye, handing Mia a small package. "It's a new notebook," he said, "for you to write your stories. Don't let them get lost." When they finally got into Marina's car, Mia looked one last time at the trestle. The morning sun hit the concrete structures, creating shadows and lights that seemed to dance. "Are they going to be okay?" she asked softly. "We'll come back to visit," promised Marina. "And who knows, maybe we can help in other ways too." In the back seat, Laura was already chattering excitedly about all the things she wanted to show her new sister: her toys, her books, her room, her cat. Theodore held Marina's hand as she drove, feeling the wedding ring that was still on her finger. She had never taken it off, even after all these months. "Forgive me," he whispered. "We have plenty of time for that," she replied, squeezing his hand. "Now I just want to take my family home." And as the car drove away from the trestle, Mia looked at Rose, her faithful armless companion, and whispered, "I think we've finally found our place, Rose. I think we've finally found our home." The adaptation to the new life wasn't easy. The first few days in the family's house were a roller coaster of emotions for everyone. Mia, used to the open space under the trestle, felt strange between four walls. Sometimes she woke up in the middle of the night in a panic, needing a few minutes to remember where she was. Laura, on the other hand, had taken on her role as older sister with a touching seriousness. She insisted on showing Mia every detail of the house, every toy, every special corner. When she realized that her younger sister didn't know how to read, she decided on her own that she would be her teacher. "Look, this letter is A," she explained patiently, sitting on the living room rug with several books scattered around. "It's the first letter of your new name." "My new name?" asked Mia, confused. "Yeah, now you're Mia Rivero. Daddy said we're going to do all the papers so you can be a real part of the family." Marina, who was passing through the room at that moment, stopped to observe the girls. Her heart ached every time she saw Mia, so small, so scarred by life, but with an inner strength that constantly surprised her. The night before, they had had a long conversation with a social worker. The adoption process would be complicated, especially considering the unusual circumstances, but Marina was determined. That girl was already her daughter in her heart. The papers would just be a formality. Theodore was relearning his own house. With the help of an occupational therapist, he was beginning to move more safely through the rooms. But the hardest part wasn't the physical adaptation. It was dealing with the memories, with the guilt, with the lost time. Every night, after the girls were asleep, he and Marina talked. Sometimes they cried together, sometimes they laughed at the coincidences that had led Mia to them. Sometimes they simply remained silent, reconnecting through the touch of intertwined hands. "You know what hurts me the most?" he said on one of those nights. "That I needed to lose everything to understand what really mattered. I needed to meet an abandoned child, to realize that I was abandoning my own family." Marina caressed his face gently. "Sometimes we need to get lost to find ourselves," she replied. "And you didn't just find yourself, you brought an angel to our family." The angel in question was still struggling with her own demons. One night, during a heavy thunderstorm, Mia disappeared from bed. After a few minutes of frantic searching, Marina found her huddled in the laundry room closet. "Honey, what's wrong?" she asked, crouching down next to the girl. "Sorry," sobbed Mia. "It's just, when it rained a lot under the trestle, we always hid in the driest places. I guess my body still remembers." Marina pulled her into a tight hug, feeling the tears wetting her shirt. "You don't need to hide anymore, my love. You're home now." The next morning, Theodore had an idea. He gathered the family in the living room and made an announcement. "I want to build a garden," he said. "A flower garden, to remember where we came from and celebrate where we're going." Laura jumped for joy at the idea, but it was Mia's smile that lit up the entire room. "Can I help choose the flowers?" she asked timidly. "You're going to be our expert," replied Marina. "After all, no one here understands flowers more than you." The garden project became therapy for the whole family. On weekends, they all worked together, preparing the soil, planting seeds, learning about each type of flower. Theodore, who previously thought he could never work with his hands again, discovered that he could feel the texture of the earth, recognize plants by touch and smell. Mia flourished along with the garden. Each new flower that bloomed seemed to bring with it a part of her that had been dormant. She laughed more, talked more, began to allow herself to be a child again. One day, while they were watering the plants, together, she asked a question that caught Theodore by surprise. "Theo, I mean Dad." She was still getting used to the word, testing it like someone tests the temperature of the water before diving in. "Do you think I'll ever forget the people from the trestle?" Theodore stopped what he was doing thoughtfully. "No," he replied finally, "and you shouldn't forget. They're part of your story, part of what brought you to us. They're like the roots of these flowers. We can't see them, but they're what keep everything strong and steady." Marina, who was listening to the conversation from the porch, felt her heart fill with love. How was it possible that just a few months ago she was mourning the loss of her husband, and now she saw him there, wiser and stronger than ever, being the father that two girls needed? Laura joined them in the garden, carrying Rose, the armless doll that now had a special place on the shelf among her other dolls. "Look!" she exclaimed, pointing to a flower bed. "The rosebuds are opening. They're the same color as Rose's dress." And they were, a soft pink, almost the color of dawn. Mia bent down to smell the flowers, a smile lighting up her face. "Did you know that roses are the strongest flowers in the garden?" she said, repeating something she had learned in her days as a flower seller. "They endure the cold, the rain, and even when it seems like they've died in the winter, they always come back in the spring. Just like us," replied Theodore, pulling his two daughters close. "Just like our family." Marina joined the hug, and for a moment they remained like that, surrounded by the scent of flowers and the love they had built together. A love that, like the roses in the Rivero garden, had survived the most difficult winter to bloom even stronger. A year had passed since that morning at the bus stop. The Rivero garden was in full bloom, filling the air with diverse scents and colors that Theodore couldn't see, but could feel in every fiber of his being. The roses, in particular, had spread to every corner, as if they wanted to tell their own story of overcoming. It was a special Sunday, the day that Mia would officially become a Rivero. The adoption process had been long and complex, with many hearings and documents to fill out, but it had finally come to an end. The celebration would be in the garden, of course. It was the place where the family felt most complete. From early on, the house was in motion. Laura helped Mia get ready, insisting that a princess needed to be perfect on her special day. Marina watched the daughters with tears in her eyes, remembering how everything had changed in their lives. "Mom," called Mia. The word still sounded like music to Marina's ears. "Can I use Rose at the party?" The armless doll, now with a new dress that Laura had made especially for the occasion, continued to be Mia's most precious treasure. "Of course, you can, my love," replied Marina. "She's part of our story as much as any of us." The guests began to arrive in the middle of the morning. John was one of the first, still with his tough guy pose, but now wearing clean clothes and carrying a small package. Thanks to the help of the Riveros, he had gotten a job as a security guard at a supermarket and was slowly rebuilding his life. Maria came with her baby, now a healthy and smiling boy who was taking his first steps through the garden. Jose, Carmen, and several other members of the Trestle community were also present. Marina had made a point of inviting everyone, understanding that improvised family from the streets was a fundamental part of her daughter's story. Clara, Theodore's former secretary, was also there. It was she who organized a special surprise. A slideshow showing the transformation of the family throughout the year. The images were narrated with detailed descriptions so that Theodore could see through the words. When the moment for the official ceremony arrived, everyone gathered around the rose bed. The judge, a gentleman who had become personally involved in the case, smiled as he saw the unusual scene, a family so diverse, united by ties that went far beyond blood. "Before we begin," he said, "I would like to share something. In all my years in the juvenile court, I have never seen a story like yours. It reminds me of a rose that grows in the asphalt, unlikely but more beautiful precisely because of that." Mia, wearing a dress the color of her favorite roses, held the hands of her now officially parents. Laura was by her side, practically jumping for joy. When the judge began to read the official documents, something extraordinary happened. "Wait!" exclaimed Mia suddenly. Everyone held their breath, worried, but she had a smile on her face. "There's one thing I want to show you before." She ran inside the house and came back carrying a small handmade book, one of those made with cardboard and markers. "Laura helped me write it," she explained. "It's our story." She opened the book and began to read, her voice small but firm. "Once upon a time, there was a girl who had no family and a man who had lost his way. They were both very lonely until one day they met. She had nothing to give but her small hand to guide him. He had nothing to give but his hurt heart. But sometimes that's all a family needs, just hands to hold and hearts to heal." Tears ran freely down the faces of everyone present. Theodore, especially, sobbed without shame. "Continue," encouraged Marina, her voice choked. "They lived many adventures together," continued Mia. "They sold flowers, helped people, made friends under a bridge. And one day, when they thought they were lost forever, they discovered that sometimes we need to get lost to find our way back home." She turned the page, revealing colorful drawings made by her and Laura. Now they have a real house, a garden, full of flowers, and most importantly, they have a family. It's not a family like the others. It's kind of broken, kind of patched up, like Rose, my doll. But it's stronger because of that, because every crack was glued with love. The judge discreetly wiped away a tear before continuing with the ceremony. When he finally pronounced Mia as officially a Rivero, the garden exploded with applause and hugs. The party that followed was a celebration of life and love. The people from the Trestle mingled with the family's old friends, sharing stories and laughter. Prejudice and social differences seemed to have melted under the sun of that special afternoon. Later, when most of the guests had already left, the family gathered again in the garden. The sun was setting, painting the sky with colors that Mia described to Theodore in vivid detail. "It looks like someone spilled honey and rose in the sky," she said, "and there are clouds that look like giant flower petals." "You know," said Theodore, pulling his two daughters close, "when I lost my sight, I thought I would never see beauty in the world again. But you two taught me to see with my heart. And that's a type of vision that no one can take away from me." Marina joined the hug, and for a moment they remained like that, a family complete in its incompleteness, perfect in its imperfections. In the nearest flower bed, the roses swayed gently in the afternoon breeze. their petals reflecting the last rays of the sun. And there, on the special shelf in the girl's room, Rose, the armless doll, seemed to smile, as if she knew that some stories, even the most unlikely, can have happy endings. Because love, like the flowers in the Rivero garden, doesn't need to be perfect to be beautiful. Sometimes it's precisely our broken parts that allow us to let the light in and thus flourish in ways we never imagined possible. The next day dawned with a pale sky, almost white, as if the city were holding its breath. Mia woke up first, watching Theodore's face as he slept. A sparse beard, furrows of worry, a fragile serenity that only appeared when the world was still silent. She wanted to memorize every detail in case everything went wrong. They drank. The coffee left by Carmen, shared the last piece of bread, and left before the first train shook the trestle. The bus stop was on an avenue lined with almond trees. Theodore sat down, his cane resting on his knee, while Mia held the bag of flowers in her lap. Time passed slowly, measured by the engines that arrived and departed, and by the stories that the girl told. She spoke of how she imagined the sea. It was almost 9 o'clock when the familiar voice broke through the hum of the street. "Theo!" Marina was there, but hesitated when she saw the child. He stood up. Marina moved forward and hugged him, the crying held back for months exploding. In a single sob, Mia lowered her head, but Marina pulled her in too, closing the broken circle. Through tears, she said that Laura asked about her father every night. When they moved apart, Theodore introduced, "This is Mia. She saved me." Marina knelt down, asked her name again, received a flower, but soon murmured, "The police think you kidnapped this child." Before he spoke, the girl recounted, in a simple cadence, how they met. Each sentence seemed to tear away pieces of pain from the adults. Marina called her sister, Elisa, a social worker. In half an hour, they were at a foster care center. Elisa checked for abuse and asked if the girl wanted to stay with Theodore. "I do." There would be procedures, registering abandonment, exams, searching for relatives. Marina squeezed her husband's hand. "We're going to do it right. You're not alone." Weeks of paperwork, consultations and interviews followed. Theodore stayed in a modest apartment that Marina had rented nearby. He still didn't feel worthy of returning to the old house. Mia got a lilac room, but slept on the mattress in his room. He read Laura's books to her, stumbling over the Braille letters that he had begun to learn. There were obstacles. A distant uncle appeared wanting alimony. He disappeared when he learned of the responsibilities. A doctor diagnosed severe anemia. Marina began cooking iron-rich soups. 3 months passed between reports and hearings. September brought yellow-flowered trees in bloom. On a warm, late afternoon, the judge granted temporary custody to Theodore and Marina. In the hallway, Mia trembled with emotion. He knelt down, felt her face. "Now you have a last name, and you have a home. But mostly people who will never leave. You!" She cried, squeezing the dried rose she kept in the pocket of her new dress, light blue, chosen by Laura. The return to the old neighborhood was intimate. Laura waited at the gate with a crooked sign. "Welcome." She froze a yard away. Mia took the decisive step and offered the dried flower. Laura accepted it and hugged her so tightly that she almost knocked both of them down. Theodore, guided by Marina, entered slowly into the light-filled living room. He touched the grand piano he hadn't heard for months and let his fingers find a simple melody, hesitant but lively notes. At night, after macaroni and chocolate fudge, the girls fell asleep together on the sofa, the armless doll sharing space with colored markers. Marina was washing the dishes when she noticed Theodore standing in the hallway. He was crying. "I don't deserve this," he whispered. She hugged him. "Deserving is a daily choice. Choose to stay." For the first time since the accident, he believed that maybe it was possible. Months later, they created the Spring Box, putting together the money from the small arrangements they sold online to fulfill the dream of seeing the sea. Every Saturday, they visited friends from the trestle, bringing bread and stories. When the safe overflowed, they boarded a bus towards the coast. In the back seat, the girls collected paper seashells, and the driver said he had a blind son who played the accordion. Strangers became bridges. On the almost deserted beach, Mia guided her father to the water's edge. He felt the fine sand, the cold foam, and cried without shame while the waves made music. Laura ran after seagulls. Marina took pictures, then dropped her cell phone to hug them. Mia took a deep breath. It smells like freedom. The following days were filled with salt drying in their hair and stories repeated 1,000 times. On the bus back, Mia described each shell she had collected, as if she were presenting an inventory of miracles. Back home, Marina kept a handful of sand in a small jar, a reminder of the day when the past stopped hurting. Life resumed its rhythm, but it never returned to being the same. Theodore enrolled in a massage therapy course for the blind and began seeing clients 2 afternoons a week in the garage. The touch of his hands became a new form of reading. He said that each muscle told a tale. Mia and Laura helped by spraying lavender essence and putting together soft playlists. On Saturdays, after visits to the trestle, they went to the farmer's market. They bought flowers that they arranged at home and sold online. Each bouquet came with a note in Braille and another in childish handwriting. Lives that are cared for blossom. With the extra money, they renovated the small room in the back to receive friends in need. The first to arrive was Maria, with the baby already healthy. She stayed for a month, saved money, and rented a room. She left a note on the mirror. Good fits anywhere. One summer dawn, the river rose and threatened the trestle. The family ran there with blankets and flashlights. They found John trying to save the few belongings of the group. Theodore guided, Marina distributed bread, the girls kept the children, warm with improvised stories. At dawn, the water subsided, but the scare left marks. The following week, they organized a campaign at the school. Parents and students donated clothes and food. When the delivery truck parked under the trestle, John said to Theodore, "You came here broken. Now you're a bridge for everyone." On a late afternoon, while watering the basil in the portable garden, Mia asked if they could still return to the sea. Theodore smiled. "The sea now lives inside us, but we will go many times." She wanted to learn Braille to read the letters he received. They practiced the first letters using beans stuck on cardboard. ROSE was the inaugural word. On the porch, under a sky ignited with lilacs, Theodore reflected. There were no more holes to fear, nor cold bridges to call home. There was a road, long, uncertain, but flowery. And above all, the certainty that each future spring would bring new colors. Because now they knew how to care for the soil where hope germinates. When the first star appeared, Mia pointed, "It's winking at us." He squeezed her hand and replied, "Then let's wink back, so it doesn't feel alone."